All right. So, to all of you watching this, a warm welcome to this session. It's the session on experiences from Europe. My name is Jakob Schornborg. I'm from the International Sport and Culture Association. I'm also speaking on this panel, and I'm very glad to have with me today Hubert Rovers as well as Paul Hunt. Now, in this session, we'll be giving a few insights from each of us three panelists, and then there's going to be a chance for us to interact and for you guys to post questions. So you're more than welcome in the chat function to write your questions during these presentations, but of course also after. And then we expect to be able to complete this session in 1 hour's time. So looking very much forward to this, and thank you for attending. My intervention will be focusing on European sport policy development. I'll be speaking very briefly about what we are doing in International Sport and Culture Association. And then I'll be talking with a few, let's say, provocative statements about how I've seen the development of European sport policies. After that, we'll go more in depth with some sport for development aspects, as well as how you can actually access EU funding, in this case, in the case of football. So let's get straight to it. First of all, in terms of who is, we are fundamentally an international umbrella. We try to serve our members and partners all over the world to make more people physically active. So we have a broad perspective, not just sport, but physical activity as our mandate. And we do deliver moving people, as we say, through our network of partners. As you can see here, we have 260 member organizations, and we've delivered both congresses and externally funded projects for the last 25 years. Now, this is the Europe panel, clearly, and while we have a global remit, I think it would be fair to say that we have a stronghold in Europe. Our headquarters is also based in Copenhagen, Denmark, where I am right now. So I hope we can address the questions relating to Europe specifically in this session. We do three different areas of things, let's say. One is advocacy, where obviously we try to tie the physical activity and the sport agenda into the sustainable development goals. We try to deliver capacity building, or solutions as we call it, amongst others through our online learning platform and online learning courses, but we also run several thematic projects. One of them with a specific focus in Europe is that of integration of refugees through sport. But also some more theoretical constructs, while they always have a very practical, applicable part to them. We also now try to develop and make indeed useful the concept of physical literacy. In fact, we want to make it as powerful and important to be physically literate as it is to be literate to read and write, or have numeracy, being able to calculate. We also deliver a congress every second year, and looking forward to inviting all participants here to our next congress, which takes place next year, if all goes well, not least the COVID crisis. And finally, we deliver campaigns in specific continents and also global campaigns. And I just want to mention here our Move Week, which is both happening in Europe and across the world, as well as our Open Streets Day, which is just another testament to ISCA's approach to sport, which is that it's about movement, physical activity, and then the more organized sport. Here you can see some of the people serving ISCA. So what I wanted to share with you today is a few insights that I have about sport policy development. I would start by saying I take a starting point in my focus on grassroots sports, sport participation, sport for all. So this may not be a completely neutral presentation, but at least I hope to give you some insights on how I see the development of sport policies in Europe. And I think one of the fundamental developments that I have observed is that in the European and EU context, the beginning was very much focused on whether sport federations, sport organizations could and should retain their autonomy to organize themselves and deal with their own issues, or whether sport was to be viewed as an economic activity and therefore also regulated by EU law. because it has some economical impacts. And some might know that there was also in the very beginning a Bosman case, which was about the rights of players that they were transferred between different football clubs. And I would like to say that the battle has gone on, but actually the development has shown that we now are looking much more on the European policy level on grassroots sport promotion, or promotion of participation more generally. And I think from my perspective, that's a positive development indeed. But to be fair, we should start with the very beginning, and we may think that European sport policies is a new development. It is new, but not that new, because the Council of Europe, so the wider group of 48 European European states, is in fact the first one to develop a European policy of sport. It was called indeed the European Sport for All Charter, and that was coined way back in 1975. Now, the Council of Europe is probably, and to be fair, not quite as powerful as the European Union today. And so the European Union and the European Commission have developed quite a number of important policies after that. And I just mentioned some of them here: the White Paper on Sport, specific physical activity guidelines for sport. There's funding programs, and Hubert will be talking more about that. And probably most importantly in the field of sport have been the Erasmus Plus Sport program, as well as specific preparatory actions in the field of sport. So one can say that the European Union and the European Commission have put them where the mouth was. They developed policies of relevance, and there's more than I mentioned here. And they also started funding initiatives and cross-border collaboration through these project grants. So then finally, what are key political dilemmas in the European space when it comes to sport policies? Some of them, three of them are listed here. One was what I mentioned, the autonomy of sport organizations versus the right of both governments and the EU to regulate sport as an economic activity, not least. And that agenda is closely linked to the second one, namely that you can see that in the world of sport, there are also very important issues and problems, not least in the connection to professional and top sport. And we can see that there's challenges with doping, match fixing, corruption, child abuse, etc. And well, frankly, I think many policymakers, politicians tend to be looking at these issues, these problems, they want to fix them. That's something that you can do as a policymaker. You can try to police and fix problems, right? And while I think that is absolutely necessary, I would like even more than today that there's also a focus on the positive benefits of sport, which I believe my two fellow panelists will also talk about. Sport is actually a solution and can help drive important societal agendas as well, not least on the grassroots level. And this is probably my final and maybe provocative point. People tend, especially in Europe, maybe to look at sport as one. Top sport, professional sport is at the top of the pyramid, if you will, and grassroots sport is at the bottom. But I would argue, and others argue too, that actually we should look at this as in a more holistic way. So you can see on the left-hand side here that top athletes could be at the top, and the grassroots would sort of support and be the food chain for the top. That's the European sport model, as it's been called. But when you look at the right-hand model, that is actually much more precise. You can see, and if you want to name it something, you can name it the church model because it does look like a church. You can see that there is a pyramid. That's the top of the church tower. And it's fair and good to say that there are people that are very much into this competitive structure. They try to come into the next level. They try to become professionals and win medals at the Olympic Games at the end. But we should acknowledge that when we talk about sport and physical activity more broadly, the majority of people do not think they will become champions. They don't even try to become champions. There might be a competitive element to the activities, but especially when the adults, they do it for many other reasons. They do it for the health part, they do it for the social part, they do it because it's fun. And I think we need to acknowledge that both in different sport competitions on grassroots level and in general physical activities or recreational sport, the motivations are really detached from top sport and professional sport. And my message here would be that if you want to promote top sport, professional sport, elite sport, and invest in that as a politician, you can do that. You should do that. But if you want to get more people participating in sport, don't be fooled that there's a pyramid. So wherever you invest in the top or in the bottom, it will all benefit the bottom. If you want to have more people participating in sport, invest in that, not necessarily in major events, not necessarily in professional elite sports. The automated trickle-down effect, in fact, does not very much exist. So far, so good from my side. I will be checking just now if I can see any comments in the chat, and if not, then we'll move on to my colleague Paul. Just a second. I don't see any comments at the moment. That means that I will hand over to my colleague Paul Hunt and share, and he will be able to share his presentation with us.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jakob, for the introduction and also for the very interesting presentation, which is a tough act to follow. Can I just double check? Can you see my screen? Perfect. So I am going to talk today about the role of European organisations in global sport for development specifically. Just briefly to introduce myself first, my name is Paul Hunt. I'm the Senior Project Manager on the International Platform on Sport and Development, which we tend to abbreviate as Sport and Dev, and that's how I'll describe it from now on. To briefly introduce the initiative, it was founded in 2003 and it has three main goals, which are firstly to raise awareness about sport's potential to create social, environmental and economic change. Secondly, to promote knowledge sharing, and thirdly, to encourage partnership building between different actors on different levels. We run an online platform, which is what we're most well known for. That platform is in English and French, and it provides a range of different content, including news and analysis, commentary articles, research, learning tools, networks and job opportunities. The website is membership based and there are more than 1,000 organisations on there and 9,400 individuals registered, and they are responsible for most of the content that we publish on the platform, so it's very much a community driven initiative. We also run a number of other projects and consultancies, particularly on capacity building. So as an example, we've recently launched an online course on sport for development with the Commonwealth and the Australian government. And we have a steering board which is made up of a number of different organisations. You can see at the bottom there, UEFA, the Norwegian Olympic and Paralympic Committee, the Australian government, the Commonwealth, the Laureate Sport for Good Foundation and the Foundation of Sport for Development and Peace. So in terms of our governance structure, we're very multi-stakeholder with a range of different types of institutions represented. We're also part of the Swiss Academy for Development, which is an NGO based in Biel, Switzerland, that was founded in 1991. Alongside running Sport and Dev, the organisation has a range of different projects in countries around the world on employment, health and education. An example is a long-standing project in northern Uganda, which works with South Sudanese refugees to address the symptoms of trauma. We are also currently working in Zimbabwe, Papua New Guinea, Myanmar, Jordan, Colombia and India. To begin this presentation, I thought I would just provide a brief definition of sport for development, just to check that we're all on the same page. The first thing to say here is that there is not a definitive or universally agreed definition. It's a topic of some discussion and different interpretations. The way I would define it for the purpose of this presentation is any use of sport or physical activity that results in social, economic, or environmental improvements for a society, community, or individual. Something worth noting here is that definitions often include the word intentional, so the intentional use of sport or physical activity, which is quite an important concept, but it's one that I haven't used here because it's a topic of debate. There are organisations that argue intentional needs to be included because the social, environmental, economic goals should really be the focus of the project, but there are also organisations who see it a bit differently and emphasise the inherent benefits of sport. So if we get the sport right, then positive outcomes will be achieved. That's not necessarily a point of view that we agree with, but it's a legitimate point of view, and Sport and Dev serves as an impartial platform for these types of discussions. The other thing worth saying here is that from our point of view, definitions of sport for development don't need to focus only on lower or middle income countries, but all parts of the world, which is also in line with the latest developments in international development thinking, whereby the sustainable development goals are seen to be relevant to the whole world and not just the parts of the world with fewer resources. To give a bit of background to the Sport for Development movement or Sport for Development as an approach, it's been used in international, sport has been used in international development for a long time. As far back as 1922, the International Olympic Committee had an institutional agreement with the International Labour Organization for social policy initiatives. Listed there are a couple of key milestones which enshrine the right to play in international agreements. So the 1978 International Charter on Physical Education and Sport and the 1989 Convention on the Rights of the Child. This is very much a potted history, and there were other key milestones too, but those are a couple of the ones which are seen as very important. And then throughout this time, sport has been used in international development projects by a lot of different organizations. For example, the United Nations Refugee Agency has used it in projects around the world in refugee camps for a long time because of the physical and mental health benefits. However, around the turn of the century, the notion that sport could be used in development projects started to gain more recognition. And here we come also to the role of Europe, which was quite central in some of the developments that led to that recognition. So as early as 1997, when the European Commission was holding negotiations around the Amsterdam Treaty, it released a clause that said the conference emphasizes the social significance of sport, in particular its role in forging identity and bringing people together. Following that, the United Nations Office on Sport for Development and Peace was created in 2001, which was very much the result of international negotiations, but it was hosted in Europe, in Switzerland. And around this time, the Swiss government was quite prominent within this burgeoning movement. There were the two Magdalenen conferences in 2003 and 2005, which for the first time brought a really wide range of actors on the policy level to get together with athletes and civil society. The European White Paper on Sport in 2007 was also an important development published by the European Commission. And this emphasized sport's potential as a tool to promote education, health, intercultural dialogue, development and peace. It also stated that the European Commission would use sport in its international development policy, so also outside Europe. This period 1997 to 2007 is often considered the growth of what I would call the sport for development and movement. And since then, a huge number of organisations have started to either emerge as new organisations that are focused on using sport for development, or organisations that already existed are adopting it more and more into their programming. A lot of European governments have led the way as well. Those include the Netherlands, the Norwegian government, Denmark, the UK, Switzerland, Germany, and France. And of course, a lot of international sports federations are also based in the continent of Europe. So here are a few examples: the International Olympic Committee, the International Paralympic Committee, the International Table Tennis Federation, and the associations responsible for football in Europe and the world, respectively, UEFA and FIFA. All of these are examples of organisations which now have developed their own foundation. So the notion that international sports federations should have social aims beyond the playing field has grown a lot during this time as well. And with the exception of UEFA, these are all institutions which have an international remit, not just focused on Europe, but they're based in Europe, which helps to create the feeling that Europe is a bit of a hub within this movement. My goal here is not to argue that Europe has been kind of the center of everything when it comes to sport for development. There's been a lot of different actors involved, but nonetheless, Europe has had an important role to play. I now wanted to quickly run you through some examples of civil society organizations based in Europe, NGOs. There are many which are based in Europe and focus on issues within Europe, such as working with refugees or on employment issues, but for the purpose of this presentation, I'm focusing on NGOs who are based in Europe but have a remit outside the continent. They are all award-winning NGOs actually, and they do great work, and they're worth checking out if you haven't come across them before. So Women Win was founded in 2007 in the Netherlands. It's grown a lot since then, and it's also registered in the US now. Their website describes them as the global leader in girls' and women's empowerment through sport, which is a statement I think a lot of people would agree with. They're very prominent, and they do really effective work, and they, by this time, worked in over 100 countries in Africa, Asia, Middle East, North America and South America. Focus areas include leadership skills, gender-based violence, access to sexual and reproductive health and rights, and economic resilience. GAME is another quite prominent organization founded in 2002 in Denmark. Their mission is to create lasting social change through youth-led street sports and culture. They focus in particular on basketball, street football, street dance, and parkour, which includes the establishment of facilities and infrastructure for these sports and training youth leaders as instructors and role models. They work in a range of different countries, including Denmark, Ghana, Greece, Jordan, Lebanon, Lithuania, Malta, and Somaliland. The final one I wanted to highlight is Skaterstan, which was founded in 2008 with the mission to empower children through skateboarding and education. They are based in Germany, but they work in Afghanistan, Cambodia, and South Africa, and they combine skateboarding with creative arts-based education and leadership skills. They are particularly focused on groups who are often excluded from sports and educational opportunities, particularly girls, children with disabilities, and people from lower income backgrounds. What they are particularly well known for is their work with girls in Afghanistan. That was where the organization first worked, and the idea of running skateboarding sessions with girls in a country which is typically seen as rather conservative, is, I think you'll agree, quite eye-catching. Apparently, skateboarding was a useful tool for working there due to the fact that it didn't have a history in the country before they introduced it, so it wasn't associated with the stereotypes around culture and gender that other sports might have been. To end the presentation, I wanted to quickly run through a few different thoughts on the role of Europe in global sport for development, and some thoughts on how things could improve for the future. I think it's fair to say that Europe has had a positive impact in general in helping to shape the global sport for development movement. It's had some of the leading governments, and it's produced some very important organizations, but these are things which I think would help us to move to the next level over the coming years. And they will also be particularly important as we move through the next stages of the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond, I think. So the first one is around the issue of funding, where I wanted to note really that it's still the case that the design and objectives of sport projects are often determined by the requirements of donors in Europe rather than the needs of the communities that the projects serve. Donor reporting requirements are also sometimes seen as a burden, particularly for smaller organisations in lower and middle income countries. And one issue here is that reporting requirements of different donors don't always align. So there are some movements within international development who are specifically looking at this issue, actually advocating for more alignment between different donors, because one of the effects that we have is that organizations with more limited capacity can become sidelined because of the reporting requirement. It's also worth noting language barriers here as well. So talking about what language a person or an organization does and doesn't understand is one thing, but the language of reporting and of fundraising of the sector is often determined in Europe, and the way that people speak about about the sector in different parts of the world isn't always the same. The other thing I noted here is just the need for unrestricted funding, and for organisations who have proven their impact to have better access to this, which would allow them to better serve their community. There's actually some really good examples on this topic from Women Win, who I mentioned a few minutes ago, who have recently been involved in a couple of funding streams for women and girls as part of COVID-19. These pool funds from multiple donors. Funding is unrestricted, and both donors and grantees are part of the governance structure, which leads to a more equitable approach to decision making around funding schemes. Diversify and decentralize decision making. So building on the last point, here is a broader point along a similar lines. A lot of research exists on the boards of sports federations, which shows that women, ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, and people from lower and middle income countries are not well represented on boards or in the management of sports federations. I've not been able to find such research on sport for development, on European sport for development organisations, but I think my experience suggests that it's likely the same, or the issue is there, even if the scale is different. So I firmly believe that better representation of these groups would lead to better decision making and improve the success of programs. Also, we all agree that COVID-19 is having an overwhelmingly negative effect, but it may also be creating some opportunities in this regard. So events that would usually take place in person are now online, which gives people in parts of the world that would usually be neglected, greater access to knowledge sharing and decision-making processes. And actually the event that we're taking part in right now is an example of that. The move towards more online events does have this ability to lead to more equitable conversations and bringing in people from different parts of the world. I would argue that once more and more events do happen in person again in the future, that considering rotating the geographical location, at least for those which are international in focus, would be a good idea, because many of them do take place in Europe, which makes it difficult for some people to access. There are some good practices in this regard. So the International Working Group on Women in Sport World Conference takes place every 4 years, and it rotates continents. Last time it was in Botswana in 2018. The need for long-term government commitments was the next point I wanted to raise. So there can be inconsistency when it comes to governments. They have changing priorities and they can be affected by election results. Some of the governments that I mentioned earlier, such as Norway, have been connected to the idea of using sport for development for a very long time, in Norway's case since the 1980s. But in other cases, it can be a bit more inconsistent. So I also mentioned Switzerland, which was seen as one of the leaders between 2000 and 2008, but has since not been as interested in this movement. What I would argue is that improving the way sport is measured would help to address that and to demonstrate impact to governments and ensure that governments see it as a serious tool in development cooperation in the long run. There's a lot of research that exists on sport for development, but often it focuses more on individual projects and programs, and it's more difficult to come across data which is at scale, looking at the impact of sport on a national level, even on a city level. I've got an example here of a project which is aiming to change that. So the 2017 Kazan Action Plan had a number of different actions coming out of it, and one of them is creating a framework for measuring the contribution of sport and physical activity to the Sustainable Development Goals. This project is led by the Commonwealth and UNESCO, and it's focusing on creating a measurement framework related to 10 of the Sustainable Development Goals and 36 targets, and they are also giving some technical support to governments to try to support them in this process. The idea would be that in 2030, once the Sustainable Development Goal period is behind us, we have a clear idea of how sport and physical activity has contributed. This is the penultimate point that I wanted to make, which is just that we need to look very carefully at mental health issues and trauma and sports role in addressing them. There are a lot of sports organisations and projects which already focus on this, but I would argue that this needs to become even more of a focus, particularly due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. In countries in which European organisations work, in lower and middle income countries, mental health services are often not so strong. There may also be more of a focus on the most immediate needs, such as food and employment in the most impoverished communities. On the other hand, in Europe, while there has been a lot of progress, the topic of mental health is still taboo in some contexts. And for example, in some more conservative in places of employment, there are still cases of discrimination because of mental health issues in workplaces. With COVID-19, there's a risk that focusing on physical health and economic recovery will mean that mental health gets neglected, even though we know that the pandemic is exacerbating mental health issues around the world. Yet sport can play a key role in addressing mental health issues. We know that it's true from a scientific point of view, due to the release of endorphins, but it can also help by, for example, enabling people to build social networks. Investing in sports projects addressing mental health issues can be a key part of the response to the pandemic, I would argue. And my final point is just to highlight the importance of partnerships in general. I think sport is fairly unusual in its ability to bring together such a wide range of actors. So this sport for development sector involves sports clubs, NGOs, sports federations, professional clubs, governments, intergovernmental organisations, universities, and many others. Earlier, I made this distinction between sport for development organisations who put social, economic, and environmental objectives first, and sports organisations who believe that if we put the sport first, then benefits for individuals and communities will automatically follow. But these two perspectives can actually be complementary. So one side has a lot of knowledge on designing activities that focus on broader objectives, while the other has expertise on getting activities right from a sports science point of view. Working together can help to strengthen an impact. Finally, there are also opportunities for organisations using sport to partner with those who are not using sport but focused on the same issues, whether it be gender equality, education, or whatever that organisation is focusing on. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to Hubert's presentation and an interesting discussion.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Paul. This is excellent. And I would ask you to stop your screen sharing, and that would allow us then to move on to Hubert, and we are still fine on time. So without further ado, I'll pass it, and then we'll have time to discuss at the end. So over to you, Hubert.
Okay. Well, thank you, Paul, for that presentation. Let me see if I can share mine as well. And hopefully that works now. Here we are. Does everyone have my screen? Yeah.
Looks great indeed. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, just as a follow-up, I think on the comments of Paul and Jacob. So my name is Hubert Rovers. I work for the European Football for Development Network, a mouthful for EFDN. So just to give you some background on me personally, I started to work in football since 2006, and I am a season ticket holder and a large football fan from a small mid-table team club called Breda, where I started as first community staff member in 2006, and we grew to a community foundation with 24 staff members in total. In 2013, my belief and my goals were behind or further than just one football club, so I joined the More Than Football Foundation, which is was an NGO in the Netherlands, started by the Dutch FA, the Dutch Premier League, and the First Division. And then I moved on and I founded EFDN in 2014. In 2014, we started with just 7 clubs who believe that football can, or professional football can and should have a bigger role in European society. We get a lot of things back as professional football clubs. You get a lot of things from the community, and my belief is, and our belief as a network now, is that we can contribute back to society on one side, and at the same time become a more sustainable organization ourselves. So 6 years ago, as I mentioned, we started with just 7 clubs, and now we are more than 100 clubs, leagues, and FAs who all work together, use football as a tool for social development on one side, but also we realized that we have have to act socially responsible within our day-to-day operation as well. So what do we do as EFDN? We have 4 pillars and 6 main topics in those 4 pillars. So the first one is connecting people and organizations together. because I believe there is the problem in professional football and a bit in sports is that everyone wants to be the best, the first, the biggest, and everything like that, which I think is totally not the right way to go in community outreach programs and social responsibility. So to prevent that, everyone is acting isolated and developing their own things in isolation, and at the same time is wasting time and money and resources on something that has already been developed somewhere around Europe or somewhere else in the world. Connecting people and organization and sharing their best practices is I think the most important part of what we do, and then providing platforms and activities and ways to share that knowledge between network members and our partners is the most important part. So we run 2 conferences each year, every time in a different part of Europe, every time with a different size of organization. So the last one was at Camp Nou with FC Barcelona, the one before with Chelsea, but we also had meetings in Cyprus, in Germany, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, with different size golf clubs, organizations that are at a different stage in their development of CSR, community outreach and social responsibility in football, and the majority of those events are bringing people together to let them share their experience and best practices. Our other pillar is creating what we call creating opportunities for members and their local partners, is creating and developing pan-European programs using that use football as a tool for the wide variety of topics that I will come back to later on in my presentation. And then the third pillar, or number 4 here, is raising quality and credibility of CSR in European football. When we started EFDN in 2014 as an official organization, then the different leagues, the different FAs, the different clubs in Europe all communicated and measured their impact in a different way, communicated in a different way, which causes a lot of issues in the credibility of what football as a whole was communicating. So we have set guidelines and some quality guidelines, but also guidelines on how to communicate and measure your impact, and to communicate that to partners, which as a whole brings a book, tools and a handbook to our members, that we all communicate in the same way to everyone in Europe. When we started in 2014, there was also a lot of distrust in professional football or surrounding professional football, that the clubs that had foundations that did deliver community outreach programs on a day-to-day basis, is that they did that only solely for marketing or greenwashing or anything like that. Yes, there is a certain part of what our member clubs are doing is part to as a strategy to build a sustainable organization, to build fan base, to work together in partnerships. So the marketing part is certainly part of our sport for development strategy, but in our philosophy, that's not something that one doesn't rule out the other one. So you can do that as long as you keep that in balance between the impact that you make in society and the impact that you have on the organization. As long as that is balanced, then we think that we can grow, that you can score more than one goal. And unfortunately, all the work that has been done by clubs, leagues and FAs is still one of the best kept secrets in European football. So the majority of the news goes about even what color boots or hair one of the first team players has, instead of all the work that's been done throughout the week by the foundation of those football clubs and their players. So what we stand for, our ambition, is that every club, league or FA in Europe, no matter how big or small, plays a positive role in their community and brings people and organizations together, and that all clubs, leagues and FAs are more than football. And what we believe is that they should be more than the men's team that plays one every 2 weeks at home, at a home game, but that everyone can and do have to do more. And our belief is that CSR, community and social responsibility, as we call CSR in European football, should be part of the core business of every football organization. It makes sense. It makes the football organization itself stronger and more sustainable, and we can really contribute to reach people that are hard to reach for other organizations in making communities better and safer. So a lot of these developments have been going on for years, as Paul and Jacob has mentioned as well. I think what happened is that because everyone called it differently, the credibility of the work was not always there. And that's why we adopted as EFDN the Sustainable Development Goals as well, adopted is perhaps the wrong word, but we start using the Sustainable Development Goals and the aims and the communication around that in a partnership with the UNDP since 2018. And we've been learning and teaching all of our members what the SDGs are, what they can do with that, how they can align and identify what their current programs are, how to identify which SDG that they are targeting already, or what they want, how they want to change that to address certain SDGs or goals in the future, and to develop their long-term strategy related to the SDGs. So from the community outreach point of view, we use football as a tool in different programs. So in football-based health programs, education, employability, social cohesion or inclusion, environmental awareness, and good governance. And these programs have been aligned with, on one side, the need in the different local communities of our members. So every time that we have a conference, we have roundtables, we do research together with our partners or our members, what kind of programs that there's a distinctive need in the areas that they service and that they are delivering in. And together we create then the Football for Development programs, the Football for Social Development programs in these areas. So in our case, our members are professional football clubs, leagues and FAs, but we are certainly not doing this all up by ourselves, definitely not. I think every club is a hub inside their community, and if you go to a game of a favorite football club, then you have a company owner sitting next to a student, sitting next to someone who's unemployed, and from all kind of different parts and different backgrounds of the community. And that's the same thing that we want to establish working within our Modern Football Network. So what we call a Modern Football Network is where the hub or the football organization, the football organization is the hub, and if that's a club or a league or an FA, and they have a variety of civil society organizations and different entities working together with them to deliver these Football for Good programs. Like Jacob already shown, is that in Europe you got the European strategy, where you think that the grassroots provide the foundation for professional football and sports. Well, that's a bit the model that we are focused on as well. But I've just learned from Jacob that I have to restructure my model a bit. No, we definitely think that it's a coherent partnership that the FAs, the leagues, and the professional clubs can and should work together with the grassroots clubs, because on one side you can grow the sport by providing good partnership with the grassroots clubs. On the other side, professional clubs can give back through community programs that they deliver together with the grassroots clubs as well, and they can share knowledge and resources on that side as well. So the Modern Football Network philosophy is something that we've developed in the recent years, and that we are rolling out that now. We are disseminating that throughout our network members. So from 2014 when we started, and just to add to that, we are a member-owned. Oh wait, now turns on. So we are a member-owned network who provide a fee for us to do some work that we think that is important for ourselves. So we have the opportunity to have some unrestricted funds, but we also have a lot of programs at the moment. We have 16 EU-funded programs that have restricted funds, and I just want to use some of my time that I still have left to explain the two major programs that we use for that. So first is the Erasmus Plus program of the European Commission, and the second one is Horizon 2020. And both of them have basically the same angle. So they have the knowledge triangle where you combine research, education, and innovation. Within Horizon, you got three major priorities. So that's the excellent science, the industrial leadership, and the social challenges. And what we use then is the part for the social challenges, and include our sport for good or football for good activities. So the total budget for a 7-year cycle, 2013 to 2020, was 960 billion in Europe, where they had a focus on sustainable growth and natural resources, but also on the global Europe, which then lines up with the sport for development on an international scale. But the security and citizenship provided also some opportunities for us to use sport as a tool in that area. The majority of what we do is funded through Erasmus, and specifically Erasmus Sport and Erasmus Youth, where the focus is on funding programs, projects, and scholarships, both within the EU and EU international cooperation. So the flagship Erasmus is the flagship EU program for education, training, and youth. Total budget of 60,454 billion. So there's a lot of money there, but the budget for sport was 265 million in the 2014 to 2020 cycle, where sport organizations, NGOs that use sport could apply for, and from next year there will be a new cycle, but it will be quite similar. What we know now is that cycle will be quite similar, and that there's basically three types of events or partnerships that you can apply for. So the main funding categories for sport was collaborative partnerships, a partnership between different organizations from 5 European countries, or a small collaborative partnership with a partnership within 3 different European countries, or the non-for-profit sport events where you had to have at least 12 different organizations from 10 European countries. So I will not go into this too much, because I think Jacob already mentioned this together with Paul as well. But from the Lisbon Treaty, there was developed the Work Plan 2007-2020, and then the financial tools, the Erasmus Plus Sport funding stream, where the policy context around that, what the possibilities were to apply for as a sport organization, was a lot around doping, match fixing, and good governance in sport, together with dual careers. So that's everything to develop the game and to improve the game and to make the game honest and sustainable, financially sustainable, but also socially sustainable. And then you had the social inclusion part, where you can really applied for programs that use sport as a tool for different, in different programs, and I will add that later on. Then you have the health enhancing physical activities, HIPAA guidelines, and then gender equality. So that was basically the policy context around that, and then that worked to a 3 key topic plan for sport: the integrity of sport, the European or the economic dimension, and sport and society. And what we focus on as EFDN is mostly good governance in sport and sport on as society. So the objectives of the eSport program was to tackle transnational threats, so the doping, match fixing, violence, racism, and intolerance. And we as EFDN, we focus on So we run programs on preventing violence inside stadiums, but also inside radicalization of football fans in society, and the combination between youth gangs and the ultra scene and hooligan scene that sometimes surrounds football clubs. And we run anti-racism and anti-discrimination programs in this part as well. We also have a program with match fixing, which then is more in line with good governance in sport, and the whole development of our modern football networks is part of that good governance strategy as well. To promote social inclusion, we got a lot of programs that I will focus on in the remaining time that I have. But just to let you know how the Erasmus program sees their partnership. So you got the program countries, which basically are 27 now EU countries, plus an additional amount of partners of program countries that add to the program, and then you got the rest of the world. So what you can do within Erasmus is basically you can work together with the whole world as a European-based organization. So what we then do is we got I only now see that I have my wrong presentation, but so we got at the moment we have 16 EU-funded programs. And then a number of programs that we fund through either UEFA Foundation or commercial companies that fund specific programs that we do. So we have, in total, we have 5 health-based programs like Active Fans, which is a program for people over 35 that come to the stadium 10 to 12 weeks and where they get do physical exercise in a group with only men, only women, or mixed groups. That depends on the country where it's delivered. And they learn about healthy food, healthy nutrition, exercising sufficiently. So that's targeted for over 35. We do a similar program, Scoring for Health, in a primary and secondary school. So that's a fully school-based program that has been delivered by our member organizations in schools in their community. And again, it is, yeah.
May I interrupt you? I just want to make absolutely sure that we do stay conscious about time. So I know these programs are great. I want you to sort of wrap them up and see if you can sort of summarize your presentation, so make sure that we get the most of the information you have. Is that okay? Because we're getting close to the finishing line. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. No problem. So yeah, so we got a number of health programs there, and then also programs on stadium access. So for instance, the TACBIS program is tackling awareness colorblindness in sports. And then we got a number of programs on social cohesion and social inclusion, including working with refugees through Welcome to Football, or our refugee employability program, Step for Youth, that we delivered together with the Barcelona Foundation. So we have a number of programs on cohesion, and we all of these programs, or a lot of these programs, are then funded through either Horizon 2020 or the Erasmus program. So if you want to learn more about all of these programs and the work that we do, you can go to efdn.org, or you can contact me via the email that is visible in your screen now. So that was my wrap up, Jacob.
Thank you, and well done indeed to wrap up quickly there. I do appreciate it. We are closing the session rather shortly, but I think we should just challenge ourselves a little bit here. So I'll just do one quick possibility for us to share a viewpoint, because I think both of you touched upon a development in the Sport for All, Sport for Development sector, a positive one at that. On the other hand, I also hear there can still be some shortcomings. Paul was talking about the need to measure more the impact of sport, and you, Hubert, have been discussing also where there still could be some shortcomings in the field of football. So we should be able to compare also the sports sector to other sectors. So if we try to do that, take a helicopter view and then specifically think about Europe. If you were to say how mature the sports sector is in terms of collaboration, in terms of measurement of impact, and say compare that to, for instance, the health sector? How mature would you then think the sports sector is on a scale from 1 to 10? So if it's as well developed and scientifically founded and partner oriented as the health sector, you give 10 the best score. If you think there's still some way to go, it's a lower score. So now you guys have to think about that for 10 seconds. And then I'll ask you what your score. I'll share mine first, and then I'll ask you guys to share your score as well at the end of this very session. My understanding of the maturity of the sports sector today compared to the health sector on a scale from 1 to 10 would be that we are at 5. Paul, what would you say to this challenge?
Yeah, I was going to say 6. I put it 7 on partnerships and perhaps 4 or 5 on measurement.
That's a valid point. Thank you for also distinguishing that one. And Hubert, what do you say?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I was doubting between 5 or 6. I think on one side we do quite well, that the interest is there, but we're not there yet. Absolutely not. And it also depends which part of Europe or what kind of organization you speak to. But I think the awareness is there that we need to improve in this part, and that we need to establish a common ground where we can report and compare better to other sectors as well. But there's still a lot of work to be done in that area.
Great, great. Thank you very much. In fact, that's a very great conclusion to the session. I think development has happened, but more work needs to be done, maybe in particular in Europe, that we tried to discuss today. So thank you, both Paul and Hubert, for participating. I'm very glad to have had the honor not only to present, but also to try to moderate a little bit here. Thank you for that. Thank you for the people that are either following this live stream or that will be watching this at a later stage. And they will be closing the session, and hope you guys will enjoy the rest of the conference. Talk to you soon.
Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.